Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. I am really excited to start my next personal project, which is a fountain pen ink journal. I've been wanting to do this for the longest time, especially after seeing all of the beautiful ink swatch journals on social media. But apart from just being really busy and having no creative spark for it, another big reason why I kept putting it off was just due to the sheer number of ink bottles I have. It felt like a really daunting project, but I think I'm just going to take it slowly, one bottle at a time, and instead of doing one single video where I swatch everything, I'm probably going to make this a series. Maybe in each video I will feature 5 or 10 bottles of ink, and we can pay a little bit more attention to each bottle. This video though is going to be the setup of the journal, and then I will do 3 ink swatches. Alright, so about the journal itself, this is a Leuchtturm A5 dotted journal. My original plan, which I might have mentioned in one of my videos, was to cut up a Rhodia pad and bind my own notebook. That way I can, customize everything. But it is a lot of work to make a notebook. And also I was adding bookbinding materials to my shopping cart online, and I was like, do I really want to spend $50 on bookbinding materials when I can just use one of my notebooks that I already have? So yeah, I decided to use one of my Leuchtturm notebooks and customize it in other ways. For the inner cover title page thing, I kept the decoration really simple. I just put down this Lucky Ink vinyl sticker, and then I just lettered in ink journal, but the spacing was a little bit off and the text being off-centered kind of bothered me, so I just doodled a little emoji. I really thought about how I wanted to index everything. The benefit of having a ring binder for your swatches is that if you, for example, have a category of green inks and you get more, you can just insert it into whatever spot you want it to. But with bounded notebooks like this, you can't really easily insert things. So yes, this is something that I thought a lot about, and in the end I decided that there were 2 things that I wanted to index my inks by. The first is by brand. So if I want to look for specific ink by a certain brand, I wanted to be able to go to the brand and then find the ink. The other is I also wanted to be able to index everything by color. So I want all of my pink inks together, for example. This way I can easily see an overview of all of my pink inks and pick one that fits whatever I need it for. So the Leuchtturm notebook already comes with an index, and I am using that section to index the inks by brand. My rationale behind this was, if I want to find an ink by a specific brand, I don't think I need to see a big swatch of the ink. Whereas if I am trying to find the perfect brown to match a certain spread, I want to be able to see a larger pool of ink so that I can compare all of the brown inks that I have and see what matches. So yes, the brand index goes at the front, and then I will show the color index in a little bit. Anyways, for the brand index, I decided to keep it really simple. Started with a subheading of the brand, and then underneath I wrote down the page number, a little puddle of the ink, and then I wrote down the color name. I also had this really good idea of adding a symbol for whether an ink was a sample or a full bottle. So if it's a teardrop that's empty, it is a sample. And then if it's a filled in teardrop, it is a full bottle of ink. And the good thing about this is if I, for example, get a sample of ink and I draw this empty teardrop, if I really like the ink and I end up getting a full bottle, I can fill in the teardrop. Another thing, which I feel wouldn't apply too often, is if I end up finishing a bottle of ink and I buy a second one, I can just draw another teardrop next to it. However, for many of us, I think this is something that we won't need to do. I am so sorry. I know my commentary is not in sync with whatever's going on in the video, but the next thing I want to talk about is the little squares that I added to the page. If you are into fountain pens, you probably know that ink behaves and show up very differently on different types of paper. In my ink collection video from several years ago, I had this idea of cutting out strips of paper from various notebooks that I frequently use. I glued them all on a single page and then swatched the inks on all of the papers, and that way I could easily compare and see the differences. I'm using the square punch to punch out little squares from a Rhodia pad and also a Hobonichi notebook. This was like a little freebie notebook that they gave, I think, with the 2025 Hobonichi orders, and I just never had a use for it, so I decided to sacrifice this notebook for this journal. And you can totally use like scissors or an X-Acto knife, but having this punch is just so much easier. Alright, we're finally talking about the first entry. It might be, I don't know, conceited, but I wanted the first entry of this ink journal to be one of my collaboration inks, and for the heading and some of the doodles I used my Sailor Hocoro Dip Pen. This is the medium nib. This way I could create like a bold heading and make it distinct from the smaller writing. And for the main writing, I'm using my TWSBI Eco Extra Fine. Under the title, I just have a line where I write down any notable things. For this ink, I wrote down that it's a full bottle, it is not water resistant, and I also noted the pen that I was using. After doing the first 3 entries though, I think I'm gonna stop writing that it's not water resistant, because I think apart from like 3 or like 4 ink bottles, all of mine are not water resistant, so it just becomes a little bit repetitive. Anyways, for the main writing, I don't really have any rules about it. I guess I start off each one with just like the story behind the ink, how I got it, why it's significant. In this case, this was like my first collaboration ink. And then if it's an ink that has a fun name and I can kind of Google something from it, I also want to write down a little blurb about the subject. So for Coffee Monster, I looked up some interesting information about coffee. I won't be doing this for every single ink because sometimes the name doesn't really relate to anything, or maybe I just don't really feel like it. For example, the second entry that I did was Robert Oster Dusky Pink. And yeah, I guess I could like search up some information about dusk, but I didn't really want to do that. So yes, some entries are going to be shorter than others, and I just don't really have a strict rule about it. Oh, also, I want to mention that the entries in this journal are not really going to be in any sequential order. I want to minimize as much ink waste as possible, so I'm going to start off with the inks that I already have inked up in my pens, and then as I switch out inks in my pens, I will create new entries. Similar to yellow inks, I have a really hard time finding pink inks that I like. I really do like this Dusky Pink just as like a color in itself, but I wouldn't say this is like a true pink color. It definitely leans a little bit more purple, but it is such a gorgeous color, and I love using this color in my notes and spreads and making little doodles. You can probably notice that I haven't written anything like technical about the ink, apart from the fact that these inks aren't water resistant. Some people might do like smear tests where you leave the ink for, 3 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and see how much it smudges. Some people might also like dilute the inks, which I might actually add that to my entries later. I think my intention with this journal is to just like spend some quality time with each ink color, especially as my collection grew just a little bit in the past few years. I just find that I don't use the same ink for extended periods of time because there are just so many other inks to use. So I kind of just want to slow down, document all of the inks that I have, and also give each ink their time in the spotlight, I suppose. I kind of want to talk about my purchasing mentality when it comes to inks and fountain pens going forward, and I guess for the past few months as well. So I feel like every time I get a new pen or a new bottle of ink, I'm always like, this is going to be my last pen, this is going to be my last ink, I don't need any more. And that is definitely true. I do not need more stuff. But I think being realistic, that is really hard to do. In my recent fountain pen collection video, I mentioned one of the rules that I have surrounding fountain pens is that I am not allowed to buy the same pen model but just like in a different color or something. So for example, I already have a Pilot Vanishing point, so I am not allowed to buy another Vanishing point just because it's a different color, and I also am not allowed to buy another Pilot Decimo because it has the same nib unit. It is definitely an arbitrary rule, but what I like about it is that I can still allow myself to buy fountain pens that I really like, but I just need to make sure that it is distinct from my collection. And I guess as my collection grows, this becomes harder and harder, so therefore my spending kind of slows down a little bit. It is definitely harder when it comes to inks because I don't want to just like own one color from every brand. And also I am primarily an artist, and I have always loved just like looking at all of the beautiful paint colors and marker colors. So for inks, I can have like 50 bottles of blue ink, and to my eyes, they're all very different. So yes, I've definitely not stuck to my ban on buying inks. I think moving forward, my arbitrary rule for inks is that number one, I can buy inks during special events and pen shows that I go to. I think for me, being able to pick out inks at a pen show in person, it just made my experience so fulfilling. So that is one of my exceptions. My second exception is if one of my good friends collaborated with an ink company, or if it's just someone who's really nice and I want to support them, then I will allow myself to buy the ink. Then for my third exception, every year for my birthday, I always do a stationery haul, so I will allow myself to pick maybe 1 or 2 bottles of ink. And then number 4, this is the last exception, it is my DeAtramentis Document Black ink. I am actually halfway through my second bottle. Many of you probably know this is my absolute favorite black ink, so I go through it very quickly, and I feel like that doesn't really count towards my ink collection. It is more so like I'm running out of something that is functional. So again, these are just like arbitrary rules that I have for myself to ensure that I am not going absolutely bananas. I feel like with these exceptions, I can still like slowly grow my collection over the years and be able to support my friends, still be able to pick out 1 or 2 bottles that I just like for what they are, and also be able to buy inks that are tied to memories of a pen show. If you have any purchasing rules for yourself, I would love to know them as well. For my third entry, I did Sailor Cilantro. This has quickly become one of my favorite inks. I don't often go for these like super bright, bold colors, but I don't know, like this just really grew on me. I did initially buy it because I was kind of amused by the name cilantro, and I think this color captures cilantro like perfectly. So I just wrote about how I got this ink at the Chicago Pen Show, and then for the rest of the entry, I just basically wrote down some fun facts about cilantro and coriander. I didn't know that cilantro and coriander comes from the same plant. I think that's pretty cool. As I said near the beginning of the video, I also wanted to create like a color index so I could easily compare all of my inks by color family. I decided to put this index at the back of my notebook. So I'm going to have a page for all of my brown inks, all of my green inks, and so on. I'm not going to be sorting this by rainbow order. I'm just going to do it randomly. When I launched my 2026 collection and I brought out the new tab colors, one of the tabs that I was working on was like a ink swatch tab where I had fountain pens with different colors. Unfortunately, that never made it to the store. I can't remember why. Maybe I just didn't like how it turned out and I didn't have time to remake it. But yeah, I might revisit that, and I guess if it turns out better, I will put it up in the store as well. Alright, so that's basically it for this ink journal. I didn't really talk too much about the inks, and most of this was about the setup and kind of like my thought process. But I think for future episodes where I maybe feature 5 to 10 inks at a time, I will talk more about each ink and, I don't know, whatever relevant thing. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I hope you take care, and I will see you next week. Bye!